A man standing in Kyoto in 1868, holding a really expensive sword he doesn't know how to use. His name is Emperor Meiji. He's 15 years old, and he's about to make the worst decision in Japanese history. Here's the deal. For centuries, Japan's been run by the Tokugawa Shogunate. The emperor? He's basically been the world's fanciest mascot. He sits in Kyoto, does ceremonies, writes poetry, very spiritual, very powerless. All of a sudden in 1853, American Commodore Matthew Perry shows up with big black ships and says, "Hey Japan, stop being weird and isolated. Trade with us or else open your ports. We've been closed for 200 years. I have cannons." How many ports would you like? All of them? That seems excessive. Cannons. This humiliation made a lot of samurai really angry. They decided the shogun was weak. The emperor should rule again. They called themselves the Sacho Alliance, samurai from Satsuma and Choshu domains. So in January 1868, these guys march into Kyoto and announce the emperor's in charge now. The shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, is not thrilled. You can't just declare the emperor's running things. We literally just did. I have the entire military. We have destiny. That's not even a real military asset. And thus begins the Boshin War. Now here's where it gets interesting. The first major battle is at Toba Fushimi, just outside Kyoto. The shogunate forces outnumber the imperial forces 3-1. They have more guns, more experience, more everything. The imperial forces have exactly 2 advantages: British rifles and audacity. The Battle of Toba Fushimi starts. The shogunate troops are marching forward, confident. Then the imperial forces unfurl the emperor's banner, the sacred imperial flag. Is that the emperor's banner? Oh no. If we shoot at that, are we traitors? I don't know. This is very confusing. Just shoot them. But the emperor? In real history, this hesitation let the imperial forces win despite being outnumbered. The shogunate troops were psychologically defeated by a piece of cloth. But in our timeline, something different happens. A shogunate commander named Otori Keisuke is at Toba Fushimi. He's trained in Western military tactics, and he's looking at his hesitant troops getting absolutely ridiculous about a banner. It's a flag, yes, but shoot the flag. In real history, Otori hesitated too. But what if he didn't? What if he just ordered his artillery to blow the banner bearers to pieces immediately? So they do. The imperial banner falls. The psychological advantage evaporates. The shogunate's superior numbers crush the imperial forces. Saigo Takamori, the great imperial general, gets hit by shrapnel. I appear to be bleeding significantly. Should we retreat? That seems wise. The imperial forces run back to Kyoto. The young emperor Meiji is rushed into a closed palanquin and smuggled out of the city at night. Where are we going? Somewhere the shogunate won't find you. This is not going as planned. No, your majesty. No, it is not. The shogunate retakes Kyoto within a week. Yoshinobu rounds up the Sacho leaders. Most commit seppuku rather than face execution. The ones who don't wish they had. The emperor is placed under house arrest for his protection. He'll remain a figurehead, but even more powerless than before. So Japan doesn't modernize the way we know. Instead, the shogunate modernizes, but differently. The Tokugawa regime knows they almost lost. They know they need Western technology, but they want Western technology without Western ideas like democracy, individual rights, or equality. Get me French military advisors, German drill instructors, and American engineers. What about their political systems? Absolutely not. We're keeping feudalism, just with rifles. This creates the most bizarre hybrid system imaginable. By 1880, Japan has steamships and telegraph lines. It also still has samurai legally allowed to cut down peasants for being disrespectful. It's feudalism with factories. The shogunate industrializes the domains around Edo, but Satsuma and Choshu, the rebel domains, are deliberately kept agricultural and poor as punishment. This creates massive regional inequality. In 1882, a young Satsuma samurai named Togo Heihachiro tries to join the new Western-style navy. I want to serve Japan. You're from Satsuma? Yes, but traitor province. That was my grandfather. Get out. Talented people from entire regions are blocked from advancement. The shogunate's officer corps is filled with loyalty over competence. Meanwhile, Western powers are watching this weird hybrid state and getting nervous. By 1890, Russia starts moving into Korea. In our timeline, Meiji Japan fought back. In this timeline, the shogunate's military is bloated and inefficient. We should defend Korea. With what? The troops that are still learning to march in formation? Fair point. Russia slowly pushes into Korea. Britain complains loudly. France shrugs. But Japan is too weak to stop it. Then the Russians push into Manchuria. The Qing and British get angry. Hey, you can't have that. That's our territory. I found it first. Put it back. Fine. Then they're looking at Japan itself. The shogunate panics and tries to buy more Western weapons, but they're broke. Industrialization without social reform means no tax base. The peasants are still serfs. You can't tax people who own nothing. By 1895, Britain and France are propping up the shogunate with loans just to keep Russia from getting too powerful. Japan is essentially a financial colony. Then, in 1904, something wild happens. Japan doesn't fight the Russo-Japanese War because there's no modern Japan to fight it. Russia just wins. They dominate Northeast Asia completely. This changes World War I. Without Japan as a counterweight, Russia is much stronger in Asia. They commit fewer resources to the European front. Germany does slightly better in the east, but here's where it gets really weird. In 1917, the Russian Revolution still happens, but now revolutionary ideas spread to Russian-occupied Korea and Manchuria. By 1920, communist cells are sneaking into Japan. In the 1910s, the shogunate tries half-hearted reforms, a fake assembly, some new taxes. They don't work. Expectations rise. Then the shogunate panics and hits people. This always backfires. Young Japanese workers in the factories are hearing about revolution. Wait, you're saying we don't have to be serfs? Correct. And the shogunate is illegitimate? Very much so. I like where this is going. The shogunate, terrified, cracks down brutally. This creates martyrs. By 1925, there's a full-scale communist insurgency in southern Japan, centered in the still impoverished Satsuma and Choshu regions. The traitor provinces are rebelling again. Perhaps we shouldn't have impoverished them for 60 years. That was your dad's idea. Hindsight is not helpful right now. World War II approaches. Japan isn't an Axis power. Japan is barely a power at all. It's a feudal state, having a civil war between the shogunate government and communist rebels, with both sides using outdated Western weapons. When World War II starts, Japan is completely unprepared, so everyone shows up. The Soviets push in from the north. The Allies land in the south, mostly because they don't want the Soviets taking the whole thing. Why should we care about Japan? Ports that don't freeze. Year-round Pacific access. Smart. It's Korea before Korea. This goes about as badly as you'd expect. The war ends, Japan is split. North Japan becomes a Soviet satellite state. South Japan becomes Allied occupied. Nobody happy. In North Japan, they try combining Marxism with samurai culture. We will create the dictatorship of the proletariat, led by the samurai class. That's not how any of this works. We're innovating. But here's the big change. Because Japan never became a military power, there's no Pearl Harbor, no reason for America to fight in Asia. And that changes everything. December 7th, 1941 comes and goes. Americans spend it shopping for Christmas. President Roosevelt is frustrated, but Congress won't let him do more than send supplies. The American people don't want another European war. Britain is about to fall. That's a European problem. In our timeline, Pearl Harbor gave Roosevelt the outrage he needed. In this timeline, that never happens. The US sends some equipment through Lend-Lease, but no troops, no D-Day, no American forces in Europe at all. Britain hangs on, but barely. They have no capacity to invade the continent. And the Soviets? Without the Western Front, Germany concentrates its entire military east. Every panzer division, every experienced general, every new tank, all focused on the Soviet Union. We need someone to open a second front. No one's coming. Then we cannot win. Then we do not lose. Hold the line. But the Soviets are huge and supply lines stretch hundreds of miles. Even with double the German forces, Moscow can't fall, and winter kills morale faster than bullets. We must take Moscow. We're trying, boss. Yes, but not successfully. By 1943, the Eastern Front has stabilized into a nightmarish stalemate across Ukraine and Belarus. Villages change hands 6-7 times. Millions die for a few miles of burnt earth. We've been fighting over this same bridge for 8 months. Which army currently holds it? I genuinely don't know anymore. Hitler wants to keep pushing, but his generals have the casualty reports. 4 million dead. The replacements are teenagers and old men. There's no breakthrough coming. Stalin wants to push west, but his armies are exhausted. 35 million dead. The country is starving. By late 1944, both dictators are facing the same problem. They can't win, but they can't admit it. Secret negotiations happen through Swedish intermediaries. The Treaty of Stockholm is signed in April 1945. Britain mediates through Sweden. The terms are grotesque. Germany keeps everything west of Ukraine. The Soviets keep everything they currently hold. Ukraine and Belarus become a permanent wasteland, demilitarized zone. Churchill signs it and immediately starts drinking. We've made peace with fascism. We've made peace with reality. It's monstrous. It's survival. America never mobilizes. No draft. No military-industrial complex. Eisenhower never becomes a hero. He's just an obscure colonel who retires in 1946. All this because Japan never attacked. No D-Day, no turning the tide. Europe is divided, and America is rich but militarily lazy. See, we didn't need to get involved. Half of Europe is fascist and the other half is communist. Not our problem. The US stays a major economic power, but not a military one. In 1950, when North Korea invades South Korea, America sends some supplies, but no troops. Korea is unified under the North by 1951. By the 1960s, the world has three spheres: German-dominated Western Europe, Soviet-dominated Eastern territories, and an American hemisphere that's increasingly isolated. NATO never forms. The US military is roughly the size it was in 1939, adequate for hemisphere defense, useless for global power projection. So the 1960s feature a divided Japan. North Japan is poor, weird, and keeps trying to synthesize Bushido code with Maoism. South Japan slowly democratizes and industrializes under Allied occupation, but it's 30 years behind our timeline. By the 1970s, South Japan is where our South Korea was economically. North Japan is worse than North Korea because at least North Korea started with Japanese-built infrastructure. North Japan started with feudalism. The technology gap is massive. South Japan makes decent cars by 1985. North Japan's greatest technological achievement is a really ornate sword factory that sometimes produces machine gun parts. The 1990s arrive. The Soviet Union collapses. North Japan doesn't know what to do. Our ideology was feudal communism. Yes, communism just ended. Yes. So what are we now? Confused. North Japan becomes the world's only remaining feudal state. They have one nuclear weapon they bought from Russia in 1993 during the chaos. They have no delivery system. They occasionally threaten to put it on a boat and sail it somewhere. Meanwhile, without Japanese electronics, the tech revolution looks different. Silicon Valley still happens, but slower. Without Sony's Walkman, without Nintendo's console, and without Japanese semiconductor competition, American companies get a little too comfortable. The first real portable music player is created in France in 1987. The first successful home gaming system is British, arriving in 1989. Smartphones probably arrive a few years later, and they look worse, because some key screen tech in our timeline came out of Japan. China rises faster because they face no regional competition. By 2000, China is the dominant Asian power, unchallenged. They're essentially what Japan was in our timeline, but bigger. Today, in 2025, divided Japan is a weird Cold War remnant. North Japan has 15 million people living under a government that claims to follow the way of the sword. They grow rice and manufacture ceremonial swords. Sometimes they kidnap South Japanese citizens. It's very strange. South Japan is a prosperous democracy, but it's culturally overshadowed by Korean and Chinese pop culture. In our timeline, anime conquered the world. In this timeline, anime doesn't exist. The global cultural zeitgeist has Korean dramas and Chinese films, but no Studio Ghibli, no Dragon Ball, no Pokemon. Kids in 2025 are obsessed with Chinese mobile games and Korean animated series instead. So all of this happened because one guy decided a flag was just a flag and ordered his troops to shoot it. Sometimes the weirdest psychological tactics are actually brilliant. Never underestimate the power of a really fancy piece of cloth. Otori Keisuke, by the way, lived to see the Shogunate's civil war in the 1920s. He was 90 years old, sitting in his estate, watching the country tear itself apart. His grandson visited him. They say the revolution started because we won at Toba Fushimi. I gave the order to shoot the banner. That was 50 years ago. I thought I was being rational, and now half the country is communist. Yes, how do you feel about that? I miss when wars were about honor and not making sense. He died in 1926 just before things got really bad. And that's what happens when you shoot the magic flag. Speaking of honor and things that don't make sense until they do, what if there was a tiny possibility that Carthage actually beat Rome? I'm serious, and it involves a lot of Hannibal.